lot of hypocrisy going on, I gotta say, from being somebody who's a little bit unique, front row seat to some.
Really? Like what? Like what do you see?
Well, it's really progressive to cast literally no offense to anything, but I was a little taken back by the they're very proud to cast a Latino actress as Snow White.
Yeah.
But you're still telling the story of Snow White,
yeah.
Seven Dwarfs.
Sure.
So, take a step back and look at what you're doing there.
Yeah.
I know. That makes no sense to me.
But,
you're progressive in one way, but you're still making that backward story of seven dwarves living in a cave. What the are you doing, man? Have I done nothing to advance the cause from my soapbox? I guess I'm not loud enough. I don't know what studio that is, but they were so proud of that, and all love and respect to the actress and to the people who thought they were doing the right thing. But I'm just like, what are you doing?
So that right there was a clip of Peter Dinklage, probably the most successful dwarf actor or little person actor, I forget which is the appropriate term, currently working in Hollywood right now, talking about how he's oh so offended by the idea of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs being remade into a live-action movie with little people playing said seven dwarfs. Now, of course, this caused the Disney Corporation, because they were in the era of wokeness, to pull back on that idea and end up deciding that they were not going to have dwarf actors play said seven dwarfs, and that is when we started to get the image of what are known in the current movie as the Seven Bandits, which is a mishmash of different races and different cultures and one little person in this new team up for the live action Disney movie, which of course caused a lot of people to say, I mean, come on, what are we even talking about? What are we even doing? And ended up angering the dwarf community, the little person community, because they had seven potential roles in a big budget Disney movie that were taken away from them, all because Peter Dinklage declared himself the king of the dwarfs and said it was inappropriate for them to be in said movie. Well, now there's a lawsuit over this, so we're going to talk about this. We're going to discuss what a disaster this Snow White movie is, but before we do, I want to thank everybody who supports this channel via actualjusticewarrior.com/join.
Give me the money. Give me the money. Okay?
I just mean that it's no longer 1937, and we absolutely wrote a Snow White that
she's not going to be saved by the prince.
She's not going to be saved by the prince, and she's not going to be dreaming about true love. She's dreaming about becoming the leader she knows she can be, and the leader that her late father told her that she could be if she was fearless, fair, brave, and true. And so it's just a really incredible story for, I think, young people everywhere to see themselves in.
So right off the top, I think it is incredibly important for me to state my position about all of these live-action reboots of the classic Disney animated movies, which is as followed. Animation is a beautiful art form. Animation is timeless. It is actually offensive on its own for them to remake these animated movies in live action. So everything we hear about casting, race swapping, and all those other additional things, changing the storyline and whatnot, to me, those are secondary issues with the movies, because in reality, these movies should not exist. In my opinion, if you want to make a new Snow White where you race swap everybody, where you end up having completely different songs, where you have a Snow White be the leader of a communist revolution, where you replace the prince in said movie with an innocent Beba Angel Aladdin who's stealing bread, you are free to do so, because again, these stories are based on fairy tales. But when you reboot an animated classic, first of all, you shouldn't do it, but the idea that you're then going to take the extra step and say, we are so much better than those people who made the animated classic, we have to fix the politics of the animated classic to meet modern times and modern desires, I think you've totally lost the plot. And that has been basically the tone and tenor of this entire production from day one. Obviously, you have the casting of Rachel Zegler, which, to be fair, by the way, everybody acknowledges that this girl can sing, and when you put her in the Snow White costume, she actually reasonably resembles the animated character. But of course, throughout all of her different interviews, at least in the beginning of this production, all she did was complain about how bad and how outdated and how sexist the original Snow White White was. And this infamous clip right here is the perfect example of that.
I know that you've told me before that your version of Snow White is different, and it's more of a 2022 version of Snow White. What did you mean by that?
I mean, you know, the original cartoon came out in 1937, and very evidently so. There's a big focus on her love story with a guy who literally stalks her.
Yeah.
Weird.
Super weird.
So we didn't do that this time.
So no prince, or a different kind of prince?
We have a different approach to what I'm sure a lot of people will assume is a love story, just because like we cast a guy in the movie,
Right.
Andrew Burnap, great dude.
Yep.
It's one of those things that I think everyone's going to have their assumptions about what it's actually going to be, but it's really not about the love story at all, which is really, really wonderful. And whether or not she finds love along the way is anybody's guess until 2024. All of Andrew's scenes could get cut. Who knows? It's Hollywood, baby. But it's one of those things.
So true,
it's
yeah.
an inner journey that she goes on to find her true self, and she meets a lot of people along the way that make the journey really incredible.
Now look, I'm not gonna lie to you guys out there in the audience, that weird clip is actually one of my favorite clips of all time. I actually find it to be hilarious, not even in an ironic way, but the fact is, the rest of these interviews on the red carpet where they're talking about how bad Snow White is, how you're gonna cut the prince's scenes because, oh, we don't need no man in modern politics and whatnot, and it's just outdated to have a man and a woman fall in love together, a man assisting a woman and rescuing her. Oh my god, that's so bad, that's so horrible. Non-consensual kiss to passed out woman, what a terrible idea. All of that nonsense, again, just flies in the face of the original, which by the way is a foundational, in fact the foundational movie for the Disney Corporation, to which they are trying to reboot. Again, this new movie is not a modern interpretation of Snow White based on a new script like we've seen with Snow White and the Huntsman and all these other different variations where they turn these into action movies or whatever. It is supposed to be a reboot in live action of the animated movie, and a crucial component of said animated movie was the Seven Dwarfs. In fact, they are arguably the heroes of the story. They get incredible character development throughout the course of the story, and of course they decided to remove it because, as we said in the open, Peter Dinklage was very upset that 7 dwarf actors not named Peter Dinklage could possibly get any kind of shine, any kind of credibility, and we ended up with this woke bastardization of these 7 bandits who apparently are still in the movie, again, to be a racially ambiguous group of people that are fighting against the queen in order to have the communist revolution. And no, I'm not kidding about this. This seems to be the actual direction that the actual film went through. The princess is leading a communist revolution against the bourgeoisie because that's what we need in our modern ideas of whatever is good and valuable and whatnot. And again, this has all led to be a total disaster.
And to everyone who hates when I win, the winged victory came to the Louvre in pieces, and people still line up to see her. And I can only hope that despite my flaws, and despite my cracks and my breaks, and there are many of them, that at every premiere and everything I do, people will wait in line to see.
In addition to that, after the October 7th attacks, you ended up having a situation where Gal Gadot, being an Israeli citizen, was obviously supportive of her home country. Rachel Zegler, of course, is pro-Palestinian. So we end up with both sides of the political spectrum deciding that they want to boycott this movie. They decided that they don't want to go see it. And in addition to the fact that you alienated the core group of fans, you also have this political fiasco in the middle of your film because, of course, the actors can't just stay out of it. Now, because of all of these different various factors, Snow White, the modern day reboot of this particular animated classic, has become a flop of epic proportions. And by the way, it was made all the more worse due to the woke pandering because they removed the dwarfs because Peter Dinklage was of course offended. Then they decided, based on the backlash to the trailers and everything related to the movie, that they were going to add them back in, but they couldn't actually have dwarf actors play those characters, so they end up giving us this CGI monstrosity of dwarves dwarves throughout the course of this particular film, where they're again computer animated to look like the animated characters, which of course makes the movie even more weird because you have an actual dwarf actor in the Seven Bandits, so you have two sets of dwarfs, the racially ambiguous mismatch of different people, including one dwarf and one girl. Then you have the original seven dwarfs from the animated movie that are also in the movie very briefly that are CGI, and it's just confusing from top to bottom, if we're being perfectly honest. And obviously, this confusion, this total misdirection, all the different various reshoots that they had to do in order to try to pander to the fans that Rachel Zegler ended up losing for this movie, cost big money. The budget of this project ballooned to $300 million, and if you guys know anything about Hollywood math, they spend equivalent to the production budget on the marketing of said film. So in order to break even, this needs to make $500 to, again, $600 million worldwide, and that is just breaking even. And of course, it is underperforming at the box office. They originally projected an opening weekend of about $50 million. It ended up making something like $48 million, which is big money to us normal people, but if you look at the trajectory of where this film needs to go, it's obviously not going to make it there. Again, a comparison of another Disney property, Captain America, the new one, the fourth one, which I believe is called Brave New World starring Anthony Mackie, is considered not doing that well at the box office when it opened up at $97 million. So if you end up having a production budget in and around where both of these movies were, and $100 million in an opening weekend is not enough for you to be on track to even break even on the film, obviously $50 million is not going to be there either. But what makes this even more interesting is now the Dwarf Actors Association, or a bunch of dwarf actors, maybe I just made up an organization out of thin air right there, are suing Disney because essentially they crafted these CGI dwarf characters and they allowed anybody to be able to play said CGI dwarf characters except for actual literal dwarfs, because again, it would be offensive for you to have them in these particular roles. Headline: It's off to court we go. Disney faces discrimination lawsuit over Snow White's snub of little people actors who were replaced by cartoons in woke live-action remake. The little people stars of Snow White are planning a class action lawsuit against Disney for replacing them with cartoons. A top US lawyer has been appointed and is expected to file a claim against the studio alleging discrimination. It is the latest headache for the company over this £215 million live-action remake. We're using pounds instead of dollars in this because it's a Daily Mail UK article. And according to the rest of this article, it says last week it was revealed that Little People actors were planning a rally outside Disney Studios in California to protest over its use of CGI to portray the dwarfs. Actress Allie Chapman, age 50, who is 3 foot 8 inches tall, said, quote, 7 talented Little People actors could have played those roles in the live-action remake, and yet they chose to use cartoons. It is an insult, and it's discriminatory. Now, this, of course, is a very interesting case, in my opinion, for a number of reasons. First and foremost, if Little People are able to sue over their replacement with CGI characters, does that then mean that other people, other groups, are able to sue based on race swaps, or basically essentially denying you the ability to even try out for a specific role due to the fact that they find it offensive or more progressive in order to recast said characters? And a perfect example of this would be the musical Hamilton, that deliberately did not cast any white actors in order to play America's founding fathers, as a part of the shtick of that musical was that everybody needed to be played by black and browns. Now, that being said, I actually don't think that this is a form of discrimination in that particular instance. Well, it is a form of discrimination, but is it a form of illegal discrimination? Because the idea is, if you are a creative and you're trying to make something creative, you should be able to employ anybody that you want. However, the dwarf issue is actually entirely more interesting than that, because essentially these CGI dwarfs and the actors that play them behind the scenes could only be non-dwarfs in order to avoid being offensive. So quite literally, you have the Disney Corporation who had 7 potential roles for people with this specific medical condition, and they exclude everyone with said medical condition while allowing anyone and everyone in order to play them. And a perfect example of this intent and desire is, of course, the 7 bandits that were in the movie, which they allowed one of them to be a dwarf, but obviously they were going in that direction that they did not want to have the majority of those roles, again, the roles of the 7 dwarves, played by the 7 dwarfs, and that ended up extending with the CGI, in which they ended up replacing them with cartoons. Now, obviously, I think when you stretch this whole lawsuit out, what's going to end up prevailing is the First Amendment, that they have the artistic license or creativity in order to not have dwarf actors in these particular roles. However, California law would probably prohibit you from banning black people or Asian people or any kind of acting group from a role just as a whole category from even being able to audition, and it appears like that is what would be applied here. So maybe, just maybe, they could get a small victory or maybe a small settlement, because honestly, this movie has been a PR nightmare from the jump, and it's only going to get worse if Disney as a corporation ends up crushing this class of dwarf actors in this particular lawsuit. But again, it goes to show you how you can be so woke, how you could be so anti-discrimination, that you end up on the complete other side of this particular issue. Again, people will call this the horseshoe theory. When you go so far left, you end up on the right. And the thing is, it's hard to argue that this isn't the perfect example of that, because what you have right here is Disney essentially saying everyone and anyone can play these dwarves. We'll CGI these dwarves to make them cartoons, but behind the scenes, they have to be regular, normal, ordinary people, because it's so gosh darn offensive for us to have these little people in these particular roles. And again, people have pointed out that they also made the dwarves in this particular movie as tall as, if not taller, or close to the height of Rachel Zegler, so they can't even be short, which is just weird and creepy. People have also pointed out that they look horrific, like the stuff of nightmares, which I am tempted to agree with. But the fact is, Disney, in order to placate Peter Dinklage, the king of the dwarfs in Hollywood, has essentially made a rule that they will no longer cast dwarfs in dwarf roles, even though it would be a great opportunity for them, thus discriminating against them in order to pander to them because they don't want to offend them. Again, it's absolute madness from top to bottom, and when you add that in with all the other things related to this Snow White reboot, you just kind of have to laugh at them for bungling it this badly. Now, of course, the core position, the true position, the factual position that you guys must take, and I want to impart on all of you, is the live action reboot, the one-to-one recreation of a Disney classic, in and of itself is offensive. It is garbage. It is nonsensical. It presupposes that live action is somehow superior to animation as an art form, which in reality the opposite is true, because the animation, how these characters are drawn, how you can set the mood, the unrealistic realism of that art form is what ends up making it so beautiful. Again, we've seen this a million times with live action anime reboots. They never capture the essence of the story because the animation style is a part of communicating said story. So that's the position that I hope people really get on board with. But all these other things that they do, the fact that these writers, again in modern times, can look back on a classic that has stood the test of time, with spoiled brat actors also reiterating these same points, and say, no, the politics in that movie is bad. That movie is just so unmodernized and whatnot, we know so much better, makes it significantly worse. But of course, I'm going to leave this up to all of you out there in the audience. What do you think about the Snow White disaster overall? What do you think about the little people suing Disney over the discrimination? Do you think it's a valid discrimination claim, or do you think that the courts will somehow figure a way to side with the Disney Corporation, or will Disney settle? All your thoughts down in the comments below, and as per usual, if you like the video, show them by leaving a like, subscribe for more content, follow me on the social medias, support me via support links in the description of this video. This has been me talking about Disney really getting in a little bit of big trouble. Till next time.